morning, everybody. I'm first of all going to explain repetition to you before we go have a look at some more complex programs that uses repetition. So, I am going to have a look at the repetition statements. I will discuss counter-controlled loops and the for next statement in this video. So, repetition, it's also called loops. This is where we repeat a process multiple times, normally until some or another condition tells the program to stop the loop. And this condition again might be this is less than that or that's bigger than that, same as what we use with if statements. Please take note that we're writing Windows applications in development software, and these Windows applications automatically execute in a loop. There's a loop that runs automatically. The user will really tell the program to stop the loop by clicking the close or exit button. We are going to use repetition statements next semester a lot when we deal with arrays. So let's assume we look at some code like this. We need to get 5 numbers from the user, calculate the total, and display the numbers again, as well as the total. Currently, we'll need to do something like this. Define 5 variables to store the numbers. We will need to have 5 text boxes on the screen. We will need to get each one of those numbers. Then we will need to calculate the total, and thereafter display again each of those numbers if we wanted to, and display the total as well. And that might still seem okay to you, but now I can ask you, please get 50 numbers from the user, calculate the total, and display that. And that would definitely, hopefully, not seem okay to you. Okay, so we are going to avoid these repeating statements when we use loops. I don't want to define many variables. I don't want many statements that does the same job except for the names that's different. And again over here. And again, we are calculate the total. No good at all. Okay, so using loops, we get to skip all of that. Let's say I needed to display some numbers on the screen using a list box. A list box control would be a control where I can enter multiple input items. To use a list box on the screen, in my control, I will use the list box, drag and drop it onto the screen, go to the properties, change the name to LST numbers, for example, where LST would be the prefix. And now for the code, if I'd like to display, let's say 3 numbers on the screen, I will do the following. My steps, I will clear the list box, I will have a loop to display 3 numbers, so my counter must go 1 to 3. In the loop, I will display a number, and I indicate the end of the loop as well. So now the VB code would be declare a variable to store the counter, clear the list box, items.clear, My for loop statement will simply specify counter must go from 1 to 3. And in the loop, the add statement would add the next value. And what do I add? Counter.toString. So this in effect, if I click on display 3 numbers, does that. If I didn't clear the list box, so let's say we comment out that one statement. If I click on the button again, then each time I see a new set of 1, 2, 3. So clearing the list box before the loop eliminates this, because the list box shows whatever I had previously. If I clear the output, run my program again, then each time when I click on the button, it executed, and I can't see really any new output now. If I click on the button, clears the list box, displays 1, 2, 3 again. Okay, so if I go back to the presentation, if I wanted to display 1 to 10 on the screen, either I would have 10 lines that says to the list box add first a 1, then a 2, then a 3, then a 4. These are literal values, 5, 6 up until 10. Or then, much better on the right hand side, I can use a loop. I can simply specify I've got a counter that goes from 1 to 10. This would automatically add 1 to it. I'll show you the syntax of the for loop statement in a moment. And in the loop, I simply say add counter to the list box. And counter will initially be 1, then 2, then 3, up until 10. Let's just look at input and output with loops. So very often we are going to use a loop to display multiple output values in a control. Best is if we use a list box for that. Or get multiple input values from the user. We're going to use an input box function. Let's just have a look at why. So if I look at input, I can't use a text box now anymore for my input. With a text box, the user can enter one value, click on the button. So now, while we clicked on the button, we want to get multiple values. This button will execute a loop. And in the loop, the user don't have chance to enter multiple values in the text box. We will need to use something else. So for an input in a loop, we're going to use an input box function. It's going to look more or less like this. Let's just have a look at the documentation first. So if we have a look, input box, it's a function called InVB, and it's going to display a dialog box for me. There's quite a few different things that the user can enter. If we just enhance this, enlarge it a little bit, we can see the prompt is something we must enter, and then everything in square brackets are optional. So I can enter a title and I can choose a default button. Okay, we're only going to work with a prompt because it is compulsory. So that means input box is a function call. I'm going to give the prompt, what I ask the user to enter. That goes as a string parameter to the input box function. and it's going to return. The user will now see an input box. The user can type in a value, click on OK. Soon as the user click on a button, OK actually, we're going to get a string back containing whatever data the user typed in. So I can ask for a name and save that, or I can ask for a number. I'll just need to convert the string to an integer before saving that. If we look at output, to display output during a loop, I can use a multi-line label control. So that's now a label that doesn't just have one line of input. I can set multiple lines. We can use a list box control, and we can use either the message box.show call or the message box function. These two will accomplish the same thing in VB, just using slightly different methods. We're going to concentrate on using the list box control because it's the easiest way. With the list box, after it's given a name, we can call the name of the list box .items.add and give us a parameter, the data that must be added. The add is a procedure that's called. So add is a procedure. It will add the data to the list box, and then the list box is finished execution. The add method. Okay, so slightly different way in which we're going to get input and in which we're going to display output. If we then go have a look, there's many types of loops that we can get in our programming life. We're going to concentrate on counter-controlled loops. That's a type of loop where I know before I start with the loop how many times it's got to execute. So not all types of loops that we're going to encounter will work like that. If you, for example, need to code a program to use at the cashier, you never know how many customers you're going to get on a day. Okay, so that would be a different type of thing that we're doing. For now, we're going to work with only where we know before we start how many times the loop must execute. So we know the number of iterations. An iteration is when the loop body executes once. With a counter-controlled loop, I will need to do the following four things. I will need to declare the counter variable, so use an integer. We need to initialize it before the loop. It's got to start at 0. We're going to test it in the loop condition to make sure it did reach the 10 or 15 or 5 times that we want to. And then if we want to count up, we're going to increment, means add 1. If we want to count down, we're going to decrement, means subtract 1 in the loop body. Let's just have a look at the increment and decrement statements. Increment means adding 1, so either the statement would look like this, or I can also do that. Decrement, subtract 1, that's when I'm counting down, so either this statement or that statement. Okay, then the specific loop statements that's used in most programming languages, there are for loops and while loops that can be used. So the for loop statement first. This is the easiest type of statement when we've got a counter-controlled loop. The for loop in VB is given to us over there. In blue you will see the reserved word. So we start with the word for, then we specify the name of the counter variable. I can define the variable there as well. I will need the data type as integer, for example, equal to the start value, the word to the end value, and optional because it's in square brackets, the step value. If step value is omitted, one would be used. Then all my loop statements. There might be one or there might be quite a few. And I will end with the reserved word next and the counter name again. So the for loop is real nice because it's going to initialize, test, and increment automatically for me. Okay, so those things are done automatically. If I have a look at the flow chart, really important that we be able to read this at least. Initialization is done. Then we've got a test for the condition, the end condition. If that condition will show me a true, I will execute the statements in the loop body, increment or decrement depending on what we need to do, and test the condition again. And this is then the loop that executes. While the condition is true, my loop executes. Soon as the condition executes or tests false, the statements after the for loop is executed and whatever is done then. So if we have a look at something like this, let's say I've got a for loop to display 1, 2, 3 on the screen. Then the condition, first of all, would be something like this. Counter less or equal to 3. Okay, that condition that's tested in the blue diamond would be something like counter less or equal to 3, and this is then done automatically for me by the loop statement. The initialization, I've specified here, counter must start at 1, so that happens once before the loop. Counter would be initialized to 1. Then the code will test. Did counter reach the end counter? Is that still less or equal to 3? Yes, it is. The loop statements would execute. That is line 11 now to display the counter value in the list box. The increment will happen automatically. VB is clever enough to see I'm counting upwards from 1 to 3. So it's automatically going to add 1 to the counter. Counter becomes 2 now. It's going to test again. Is 2 less or equal to 3? Yes, it is less. So go display 2, line 11 executes again. Increment will execute. Test is 3 less or equal to 3. It's true. And right at the end, counter less or equal to 3 will be false because if it added 1 once more, counter stores 4 and that condition will stop. Let's go and have a look, see the code execute. So if I now start the debugger, first step would clear the list box. Initialization will execute and the test. If I put my cursor over counter, it shows counter stores 1. So this line will display 1 in the list box. Next would execute and counter would automatically be incremented. If I put my cursor now over counter, it's 2. It tested automatically as well. 2 is less or equal to 3, so this will display the 2 in the list box. Next, we'll add 1 to counter. So counter becomes 3. It's going to test, did I reach the end yet? This counter less or equal to 3 is true. So that means that line will execute one last time. Next, we'll now add 1 to counter. It becomes 4, and there's no more statements after the for loop. So end sub executes, which stops the code, and I've got the 1, 2, 3 that's displayed in the list box. Okay, so the test and the increment happens automatically for me with the for loop. If I need to display any other values, I have got the ability to. So if I wanted to display in increments of 0.5 quite a few numbers, I can change my counter variable so that it's a different type. And if I now include the step value, remember if I want 1 as the step value, I don't need to specify it. Anything else, I'll need to include the step value. So this code over there will display from 0 to 3 in increments of 0.5 for me. If I want to display from 5 to 1 in the list box, then I simply need to include the step value of -1. That would tell VB decrement. So there's a few code examples now. If I include from 1 to from 5 to 1, but I don't include the step value, then this loop won't execute at all, because 5 would be the starting value, and then if something is lower than the starting value, it doesn't execute at all. We've reached the end, VB would say. If I need to get 5 values from the user and then display it in a list box, this would be the code. So using input box, I can ask for a number, I can save it, and that number can now be displayed in the list box. If I need to get 5 names from the user, I can do so with ease. If we just change that code a little bit and we ask for 3 names, I can include the counter value so that we display enter name 1, enter name 2, enter name 3 to the user. And this is just a little bit more user friendly then. I've got a constant 3 that I use for my loop to make the code a little bit more maintainable, because now if I need to change anything, I change the constant. If I needed 30 names all of a sudden. Okay, so let's have a look. What would this code display in the list box? And the answer would be 1 and 4. It would initialize to 1. It would display the 1. Next, we'll add 3 to it. It would be 4. 4 less or equal to 5 is true. It would display the 4 that's stored. Next, we'll add 3 to it, makes it 7. And 7 would be after 5, so that would stop the loop. What would display in this list box? I've got from 1 to 22, step 2. So the answer would be 135 up until 21. If I go add something like this, go from 25 to 1, then nothing is going to execute because the loop never executes, nothing is displayed. If I enter a step value that's negative, shows me to count down, so step -3 will go 25, 22, 19, etc. If I add something like this from 0 to 10, step 2.5, then I've got 0, 2.5, 5, 7.5, and 10. So in summary, we can use the repetition structure, a loop, when the computer needs to process multiple instructions. That condition that I'm testing would be either evaluated true or false. We're going to use the for loop statement. It's the easiest statement because it will initialize, test, and increment the loop counter automatically. And remember to specify a start and an end value with a for statement, and also the step value if one must not be used. Thank you.